The best Christmas pageant ever is just a kind of a fun Christmassy book about these crazy kids named the Herdmans. So make sure you listen to chapter one if you didn't already. And the narrator who's telling the story um, goes to school with Imogene Herdman, one of the meanest Herdmans that there is. Mother didn't expect to have anything to do with the Christmas pageant except to make me and my little brother Charlie be in it. We didn't want to. And to make my father go and see it. He didn't want to. Every year he said the same thing. I've seen the Christmas pageant. You haven't seen this year's Christmas pageant, Mother would tell him. Charlie's a shepherd this year. Charlie was a shepherd last year. No, you go on and go. I'm just going to put on my bathrobe and sit by the fire and relax. There's never been anything different about the Christmas pageant. There's something different this year, Mother said. What? Charlie's wearing your bathrobe. So that year my father went to see his bathrobe, he said. So when you dress up like to be Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, they kind of wore bathrobes because back in the old days they wore robes. So that's what the Christmas pageant again is. Actually, he went every year, but it was always a struggle, and Mother said it was her contribution to the Christmas pageant, getting my father to go to it. But then she got stuck with the whole thing when Mrs. George Armstrong fell and broke her leg. We knew about this as soon as it happened because Mrs. Armstrong only lived a block and a half away, and we heard the siren and saw the ambulance and watched the policeman carry her out of the house on a stretcher. Call Mr. Armstrong at his work, she yelled at the policeman. Shut off the stove under my potatoes. Inform the ladies' aid I won't be at the meeting. One of the neighbor women had said, Helen, are you in much pain? And she yelled back, Yeah, terrible. Don't let those children tear up my privet hedges. Even in pain, Mrs. Armstrong could still give orders. She was so good at giving orders that she just naturally was the head of anything she belonged to. And at church, she did everything but preach. Most of all, she ran the Christmas pageant every year, and here she was 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, flat on her back. I don't know what they'll do now about the pageant, Mother said. But the pageant wasn't the only problem. Mrs. Armstrong was also chairman of the Ladies' Aid Bazaar and coordinator of the Women's Society potluck supper, and there was a lot of telephoning back and forth to see who would take over those jobs. Mother had a list of names, and while she was calling people about the Ladies' Aid Bazaar, Mrs. Homer McCarthy was trying to call Mother about the potluck supper, and Mrs. McCarthy got somebody else to do that, and Mother got somebody else to do the bazaar, so the only thing left was who was going to be in charge of the Christmas pageant. And my mom got stuck with that. I could run the potluck supper with one hand tied behind my back, Mother told us. All you have to do is make sure everybody doesn't bring meatloaf, but the Christmas pageant? Our Christmas pageant isn't what you call four-star entertainment. Mrs. Armstrong breaking her leg was the only unexpected thing that ever happened. The script is always the same. The inn, the stable, the shepherds, the star, and so are the costumes, and so is the casting. Little primary kids are the angels. Intermediate kids are the shepherds. Big boys are wise men. Elmer Hopkins, the minister's son, always is Joseph for as long as I can remember. And my friend Alice Wendelkin is Mary because she's so smart and so neat and clean and most of all so holy looking. All the rest of us are angel choir lined up according to height because nobody could sing in parts. As a matter of fact, nobody could sing. We're strictly a no-talent outfit except for a girl named Alberta Bottles who whistles. Last year, Alberta whistled What Child Is This for a change of pace, but nobody liked it, especially Mrs. Bottles, because Alberta put too much into it and ran out of air and passed out cold in the manger on the middle of the third verse. Aside from that, though, it's always just the Christmas story year after year, with people shuffling around in bathrobes and bed sheets and sharp wings. Well, my father said, once Mother had got put in charge of it, here's your big chance. Why don't you cancel the pageant and just show movies instead in church? Movies of what? Mother said. I don't know. Fred Stamper has 5 big reels of Yellowstone National Park. What does Yellowstone National Park have to do with Christmas? My mom said. I know a good movie, Charlie said. We had it at school. It shows a heart operation and 2 kids got sick. Never mind, Mother said. I guess you all think it's pretty funny, but the Christmas pageant is a tradition, and I don't plan to do anything different. Of course, nobody thought about the Herdmans in connection with the Christmas pageant. Most of us spent all week in school being pounded and poked and pushed around by the Herdmans, and we looked forward to Sunday as a real day of rest. Once a month, the whole Sunday school would go to church for the first 15 minutes of the service and do something special, like sing a song or act out a parable or recite Bible verses. Usually the little kids sang Jesus Loves Me, which is all they were up to. But when my brother Charlie was in with the little kids, his teacher thought up something different to do. She had everybody write down on a piece of paper what they liked best about Sunday school, or draw a picture of what they liked best. And when we all got up in church, she stood up in the front of the congregation and said, Today, some of our youngest boys and girls are going to tell you what Sunday school means to them. Betsy, what do you have on your paper? So Betsy stood up in church and said, "What I like best about Sunday school is the best good feeling that I get when I go there." I don't think she really wrote that down, but it sounded good, of course. One kid said he liked hearing all the Bible stories, and another kid said, "I like learning songs about Jesus." And 8 or 9 little kids stood up and said what they liked, and it was always something good about Jesus or God or cheerful friends or a nice teacher. Finally, the teacher said, "I think we have time for just one more. Charlie, what is it that you like about Sunday school?" So my little brother Charlie stood up, and he didn't even look at his piece of paper. This is what he said. "What I like best about Sunday school is that there aren't any herdmans here." Well, the teacher could have stuck with "Jesus loves me" because everybody forgot all the nice things and just remembered what Charlie said about the herdmans. When we went to pick him up after church, his teacher told us, "I'm sure there are many things that Charlie likes about Sunday school, and maybe he will tell you what they are." She smiled at us, but you could tell she was really mad. And on the way home, I asked Charlie, "What are some of the other things you like that she was talking about?" He said, "Well, I don't know. I like the other stuff, but she said to write down what we like best. And what I like best is there's no herdmans." Well, that's not a very Christian sentiment, my father said. "Maybe not, but it's a very practical one," Mother said. "Last year, Charlie had spent the whole second grade being black and blue because he had to sit next to Leroy Herdman. In the end, it was Charlie's fault that the Herdmans came to our church. For 3 days in a row, Leroy Herdman stole the dessert from Charlie's lunchbox, and finally Charlie just gave up trying to do anything about it. "Oh, go on and take it," he said. "I don't care. I get all the dessert I want in Sunday school." And Leroy wanted to know more about that. "What kind of dessert?" "Chocolate cake," Charlie said, "and candy bars and cookies and Kool-Aid. We get refreshments all the time, all we want." "You're a liar," Leroy said. Leroy was right. Sometimes we got jelly beans at Easter and maybe punch and cookies on Children's Day, but that was it. "We get ice cream too," Charlie said, "and donuts and popcorn balls." "Who gives it to you?" Leroy said. "The minister," said Charlie. He didn't know what else to say since he was making it up. Of course, that was the wrong thing to tell the Herdmans if you wanted them to stay away. And sure enough, the very next Sunday, there they were, slouching into Sunday school, eyes peeled for the refreshments. "Where do you get the cake?" Ralph asked for the Sunday school superintendent and Mr. Grady. "Well, son, I don't know about the cake, but they're collecting the food packages out in the kitchen." What he meant was the canned stuff we brought in every year in Thanksgiving for the orphans. It was just our bad luck that the Herdmans picked that Sunday to come, because when they saw all the cans of spaghetti and beans and grape drink and peanut butter, they figured there must be some truth to what Charlie said about refreshments. So they stayed. They didn't sing any hymns or say any prayers, but they did make a little money because I saw Imogene take a handful of coins out of the collection basket when I went past her. At the end of the morning, Mr. Grady came to every class and made an announcement. "We're going to start rehearsals soon for our Christmas pageant," he said, "and next week after the service, we're all going to gather in the back of the church to decide who will get the parts in the play. But of course, we want every boy and girl in our Sunday school to take part in the pageant, so be sure your parents know that you'll be staying a little later next Sunday." Mr. Grady made this same speech every year, so he didn't get any wild applause. Besides, as I said, we all knew who was going to get the parts anyway. Alice Wendelkin must have been a little bit worried, though, because she turned around to me with a sickly smile on her face and said, "I hope you're going to be in the angel choir again. You're so good in the angel choir." What she meant was, "I hope you won't get to be Mary just because your mother's running the show." But she didn't have to worry. I didn't want to be Mary. I didn't want to be in the angel choir either, but everybody had to be something. All of a sudden, Imogene Herdman dug me in the ribs with her elbow. She had the sharpest elbows of anybody I ever knew. "What's a pageant?" she said. "It's a play," I said. And for the first time that day, Imogene looked interested. All the Herdmans are big moviegoers, although they never pay their own way. 1 or 2 of them start a fight at the box office of the theater while the others slip in. They get their popcorn the same way, and then they spread out all over the place so the manager can never find them before the movie's over. "What's the play about?" Imogene said. "Well, it's about Jesus," I said. "Everything here is," she said. So I figured she didn't care much about the Christmas pageant, but I was wrong. Mrs. Armstrong, who was still trying to run things from her hospital bed, said that the same people always got the main parts, but it's important to give everyone a chance, she told Mom. "So let me tell you what to do." Mother sighed and turned off the heat under the pork chops. "All right, Helen," she said. Mrs. Armstrong called Mother at least every other day, and she always called at supper time. "Don't let me interrupt your supper," she always said, and then she went right on and did it anyway, while my father paced up and down the hall saying things under his breath about Mrs. Armstrong. Here's what I do, Mrs. Armstrong said. I get them all together and I tell them about the rehearsals and that they must all be on time and pay close attention. And then I tell them that the main parts are Mary, Joseph, and the wise men and the angel of the Lord. But then I always remind them that there are no small parts, only small actors. Do they even know what that means? Mother said. Oh, yes, Mrs. Armstrong said. Later, Mother asked me if I knew what they meant about small parts and small actors. I didn't really know. None of us did. It was just something Mrs. Armstrong always said. I guess it meant the short kids have to be in the front of the front row of the angel choir, and or else nobody else can see them. I thought so, said Mother. Well, that's not what it means at all. It really means that every single person in the pageant is just as important as every other person. That the littlest baby angel is just as important as Mary. Yeah, go and tell that to Alice Wendelken, I said. And Mother told me not to be a smart aleck. She didn't get very mad, though, because she knew I was right. You could have a Christmas pageant without any baby angels, but you could not have one without Mary. Mrs. Armstrong knew it, too. I always start with Mary, she told Mother over the telephone. I tell them we must choose our Mary carefully because Mary is the mother of Jesus. I know that, said Mother, wanting to get off the telephone and cook her pork chops. And then I tell them that Mary should be cheerful and happy little girl who is unselfish and kind to others. Then I tell them about Joseph, that he was God's choice to be Jesus' father, and our Joseph ought to be a little boy. She went on and got as far as the second wise man when Mother said, Helen, I got to go now. There's somebody at the door. Actually, there was someone at the door. It was my father, standing out on the porch in his coat and hat, leaning on the doorbell. When Mother let him in, he took off his hat and bowed to her. Lady, can you give me some supper? I haven't had a square meal in 3 days. Oh, for goodness sake, said Mother, come in. What will the neighbors think to see you standing out there ringing your own doorbell? And why didn't you ring the doorbell 10 minutes ago so I could have gotten off the phone? Mrs. Armstrong called Mother 2 more times that week to tell her that people could hem up the costumes, but they couldn't cut them, and to tell her not to let the angel choir wear lipstick. And by Sunday, Mother was already sick of the whole thing. After church, we all filed in the back 7 pews along with 2 or 3 Sunday school teachers who were supposed to keep everybody quiet. It was a terrible time to try to keep everybody quiet. All the little kids were tired, and all the big kids were hungry, and all the mothers just wanted to go home and cook dinner, and all the fathers wanted to go home and watch the football game on TV. Now, this isn't going to take very long, said Mother. My father said it better not take very long because he wanted to watch the football game, too. He also wanted to eat. He said he hadn't had a decent meal all week. First, I'm going to tell you about the rehearsals, said Mother. We'll have our rehearsals on Wednesdays at 6:30. We're only going to have 5 rehearsals, so you have to be there on every one. What if we get sick? Said a little kid in the front pew. You won't get sick, said Mother, which was exactly what she had told Charlie that morning when Charlie said he didn't want to be a shepherd and would be sick to his stomach if she made him be one. Now you little children in the cradle room in the primary class will be our angels, said Mother. You'll like that, won't you? They all said yes. What else could they say? The older boys and the girls will be the shepherds, and the guests at the inn and the members of the choir. Mom was really zipping along, and I thought how mad Mrs. Armstrong would be if she knew how fast she was going. And we need Mary and Joseph and the 3 wise men and the angel of the Lord. Those aren't hard parts, but they're very important parts, so those people must absolutely come to every rehearsal. What if they get sick? It was the same little kid, and it made you wonder what kind of a little kid always talks about sickness. They won't get sick either, Mother said, looking a little mad. Now we all know what kind of person Mary was. She was quiet and gentle and kind, and the little girl who plays Mary should try to be that kind of person. I know that many of you would like to be Mary in our pageant, but of course we can only have one Mary. So I'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll all decide together which girl should get the part. That was pretty safe to say, since the only person who ever raised their hand was Alice Wendelken. But Alice just sat there, chewing on a piece of her hair and looking down at the floor, and the only person who raised her hand that time was Imogene Herdman. Do you have a question, Imogene? Mother said. I guess that was the only reason she could think of for Imogene to have her hand up. No, Imogene said. I want to be Mary. Really? And then she looked back over her shoulder. And Ralph wants to be Joseph. Yeah, said Ralph. Mother just stared at them. It was like a detective movie where the nice little gray-haired lady sticks a gun in the bank window and says, give me all your money, and you can't believe it. Mother could not believe this. Well, she said after a minute, we want to be sure that everyone has a chance. Does anybody else want to volunteer for Joseph? No one did. No one ever did, especially not Elmer Hopkins, but he couldn't do anything about it because he was the minister's son. But one year he didn't volunteer to be Joseph, and neither did anyone else, and afterwards I heard Reverend Hopkins talking to him in the hall. You're going to be Joseph, back then, he said. That's it. I don't want to be Joseph, said Elmer. I'm too big and I feel dumb up there, and all those little kids give me a pain in the neck. I can understand that, said Reverend Hopkins. I can even sympathize, but till somebody else volunteers for Joseph, you're stuck with it. Nobody's ever going to volunteer, said Elmer. I even offered Grady Baker 50 cents to be Joseph, and he wouldn't do it. I'm going to have to be Joseph for the rest of my life. Cheer up, Reverend Hopkins said. Maybe somebody will turn up. Well, I bet they never thought it was going to be Ralph Herdman. All right, Mother said. Ralph will be our Joseph, and now does anyone else want to volunteer for Mary? Mother looked around, trying to catch somebody's eye. Anybody's eye. Janet? Roberta? Alice? Don't you want to volunteer this year? No, Alice said, so low you could hardly hear her. I don't want to. Nobody volunteered to be the wise men either, except Leroy, Claude, and Ollie Herdman. So there was my mother, stuck with a Christmas pageant full of Herdmans in the main roles. And there was only one Herdman left over and one main role left over, and you didn't have to be very smart to figure out that Gladys was going to be the angel of the Lord. What do I have to do? Gladys said. Well, the angel of the Lord was the one who brought the good news to the shepherds, Mother said. Right away, all the shepherds began to wiggle around in their seats, figuring that any good news Gladys brought them would probably come with a smack in the teeth. Charlie's friend, Hobie Carmichael, raised his hand and said, I can't be a shepherd. We're going to Philadelphia. Why didn't you say that before? Mother said. I forgot. Another kid said, my mother doesn't want me to be a shepherd. Why not? Mother said. I don't know. She just said, don't be a shepherd. And one kid was honest. Gladys Herdman hits too hard, he said. Well, Gladys isn't going to hit anybody, Mother said. What an idea. The angel just visits the shepherds in the field and tells them that Jesus is born. Yeah, and he hits them, said the kid. Of course, he was right. You could just picture Gladys whamming shepherds left and right, but Mother said that was perfectly ridiculous. I don't want to hear another word about it, she said. No shepherds may quit or get sick. And while everyone was leaving, Mother grabbed Alice Wendelkin by the arm and said, Alice, why in the world didn't you raise your hand to be Mary? I don't know, said Alice, looking mad. But I knew. I heard Imogene Herdman telling Alice what would happen to her if she dared to volunteer. All the ordinary, everyday Herdman things like clunking you in the head and drawing pictures all over your homework papers and putting worms in your coat pocket. And Alice had said, I don't care. I don't care what you do. I'm always Mary in the pageant. And next spring, said Imogene, when the pussy willows come out, I'm going to stick a pussy willow plant so far down your ear that no one can reach it. And it will sprout there, and it will grow and grow, and you're going to spend the rest of your life with a pussy willow bush growing out of your ear. You had to admire her. That was the worst thing any of them had all ever thought of to do. Of course, some people might not think that could happen, but it could. Ollie Herdman did it once. He got this terrible earache at school, and when the nurse looked down his ear with a little lighted tube, she yelled so loud you could hear her all the way down the hall. He's got something growing down the side of his ear, she said. And they had to take Ollie to the hospital and put him under and dig out this sprouted pussy willow out of his ear. So that was why Alice kept her mouth shut about being Mary. You know she wouldn't do all those things she said, I told Alice as we walked home. Yes, she would, Alice said. Herdmans will do anything. But your mother should have told them that they can't be in the play. Somebody should have put Imogene out of the pageant and all the rest of them, too. They're going to do something terrible and ruin the whole thing. I thought she was probably right, and so did lots of other people, and for 2 or 3 days all anybody could talk about was the Herdmans being Mary and Joseph and all. Mrs. Homer McCarthy called Mother to say that she had been thinking and thinking about it, and if the Herdmans wanted to participate, why didn't we just let them hand out programs at the door? We don't have programs for the Christmas pageant, said Mother. Well, maybe we should get some printed and put the Herdmans in charge of that. Alice's mother told the Ladies' Aid that it was sacrilegious to let Imogene Herdman be Mary. Somebody we never heard of called up Mother on the telephone, said her name was Hazelbeck and she lived on Sproul Hill, and was it true that Imogene Herdman was going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the church play? Yes, said Mother, Imogene is going to be Mary in our play. And the rest of them too, said the lady. Yes, Ralph is going to be Joseph, and the others are the wise men and the angel of the Lord. You must be crazy, said Mrs. Hazelbeck to my mother. I live next door to that outfit, and they're yelling and screaming, and their insane cat and their garage door going up and down. Let me tell you, you're in for a rowdy time. Some people said it wasn't fair for the whole family who didn't even go to church to barge in and take over the pageant. My father said somebody better lock up the Women's Society silver service, and my mother just said she would rather it be in the hospital with Mrs. Armstrong. But then the flower committee took a potted geranium to Mrs. Armstrong and told her what was going on, and she nearly fell out of bed and said, I feel personally responsible. Whatever happens, I accept the blame. If I had been around, that never would have happened. Well, this made my mother so mad she couldn't see straight. If she'd been up and around, it wouldn't have happened, said Mother. That woman, she must be surprised the sun still comes up every morning without having her there to supervise. Well, let me tell you. Don't tell me, said my father. I'm on your side. I just mean that Helen Armstrong is not the only woman alive who can run a Christmas pageant. Up until now, I made up my mind just to do the best I could under the circumstances, but now I am going to make this the very best Christmas pageant anyone ever saw, and I'm going to do it with the Herdmans too. After all, they raised their hands and nobody else did, and that's that. And it was too. For one thing, nobody else wanted to take over the pageant with or without the Herdmans, and for another thing, Reverend Hopkins got fed up with the complaints and told everybody where to get off. Of course, he didn't say, go jump in the lake, Mrs. Wendelkin, or anything like that. He just reminded everyone that when Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me, he meant all the little children, including the Herdmans. So that shut everybody up, even Alice's mother, and the next Wednesday, we started rehearsals. How do you think the play's going to go? Pretty crazy with those kids, huh?